Hello everyone! In this week's video, I'm critiquing my viewers' art. It is time again for another critiquing video. Many of you like these and request that I do them and say that they are helpful. A bit of a disclaimer before we jump in. Just because I am providing feedback does not mean I think my art is perfect in any way, shape, or form. I'm just trying my best to share knowledge that I have learned over the years with others. Also, all of the art in this video was submitted by artists that want me to provide feedback on their work. So I'm not trying to just give feedback to random artists. They requested that I do so. Lastly, some people get really sad or angry that their art is not featured, and I can understand this feeling. I am sorry I'm not able to provide feedback on everyone's art. There are hundreds of submissions and it's just not possible for me to get through all of them. Anyways, with all that out of the way, let's look at some art. For this drawing, the artist felt like there was something off with the hand. The main thing that sticks out to me is that the anatomy of the hand feels overdefined. This makes it so the hand doesn't really match the face of the character. So I'm going to go in and lighten these details and make them a bit softer. You defined a lot of the details with lines, and sometimes when using lines it can make the details feel more prominent or harsh. So I'm going over the line work with color and kind of trying to emphasize the forms more with shading. Lastly, I'm going to add a small detail to help the hand feel more like it is resting on the face. I'm going to include a soft shadow along the side of the hand on the face. It's a small detail but can help the objects feel more related or like they're interacting. So here is before and after. Very small changes, but I hope they help. This artist is wondering how they can make their poses more dynamic. And help me get my point across, I'm going to be using a 3D model, and I'll make it be in a similar pose to the drawing. One thing that can help with making poses feel more dynamic or interesting is camera angle or viewpoint. For your picture, we are looking at the character pretty straight on. By simply changing the angle to be a bit below the character, we can help it feel a bit more interesting. The same can be said if we change the view to be above the character. Of course, drawing things like this is easier said than done. When you start working with more complicated angles, you have to have an understanding of how forms appear at these different angles. Something that helped me when I was trying to learn to draw more complicated poses or the different body parts in perspective, I would draw over pictures and try to break up the pose into shapes that fit the perspective. I would then try to replicate this without drawing over the picture. This would help me because I get used to breaking up the references into shapes, and then I'd be trying to replicate these shapes on my own. So yeah, there are a lot of things that go into making poses more dynamic. And this is just one of them, but it's a good thing to consider. Overall, this picture is very pretty and the face feels really nice. Something that does stand out to me is that the top of the head feels long. When drawing characters like this, it can help to try to keep the ratio the same between the lower and upper part of the head. Like when I draw heads, I try to place the eyes around the halfway point. This helps keep the face balanced. So if I draw some lines and try to have a similar amount of space for the lower and upper part of the head, the top of the head should be about here. I'm going to smush everything down with the transform tool, and I'm not going to make the head go all the way down to the line that I drew, since with your style you do seem to like to add a good amount of volume to the hair. So I'm going to allow space for hair volume, but I'm still overall making the head smaller. Since I transformed the art, I need to change the canvas size, and you have the picture slightly offset, but I'm going to center it. The offset isn't enough to add interest, and I felt like it was just making the composition feel a little off. And here's the before and after. These are very small tips, but I hope they help. This artist wanted some help with the faces as well as with their color choices. So with both drawings, the jaw area feels off. They are ending too early and the ear is not in the right spot. I'm going to start by adjusting the female face. I make it so the chin is more pushed to the left and doesn't sink in as much. It'll also connect more back by where the ear will be placed. Speaking of the ear, I'm going to paint over it and move the ear down. For ears, when placing them, you want the top of the ear to align with the eye and the bottom to align with the nose. However, the space between the mouth and the nose does feel a bit off, like there is too much space between the nose and the mouth. So I'm going to move the nose down and also adjust the mouth a bit. So here is before and after. I am basically going to repeat the same process for the male character, so we will speed through this. This time I kind of just pushed things around with the liquify tool since I felt like that would work for this one instead of painting over everything. Lastly, the artist was wondering what my thoughts are when it came to the color choices, and something I noticed is that the colors don't have a lot of contrast. If I turn the picture to grayscale, we can see that the colors are all very similar with how light or dark they are. So I'm going to quickly adjust the colors to add a little bit of contrast. I'm not saying you have to use these exact colors. I'm just saying that for your color choices, try to think about using lighter and darker colors. This can make things more interesting as well as more readable and easier to understand. So yeah, now the colors have more contrast. Here are the before and after, and I hope this helped you. This artist wanted some help with the shading. I do really like the shapes of some of your highlights, especially the one on the sleeve. It feels very nice. Something I am noticing is that the coloring and shading feels kind of dull. You also use a very blendy style, and I'm not sure if the rendering matches with your drawing style. They kind of feel like they're conflicting. First, let's talk about the colors. When I drag my eyedropper tool through your shading, the hue doesn't change much. It kind of jitters around, but it's not majorly moving. If I select the colors from the piece and make swatches, we can see that the colors are all on the more desaturated side. Also, there's nothing wrong with using desaturated colors. The only reason I'm pointing this out is because it feels like these colors don't match the kind of more cartoony vibe of the drawing. To match with the fun style of the drawing, I would use more saturated colors that also vary in their hue. By making your shading colors a different hue, you can make the coloring more vibrant and lively. Like for the skin tones, I'm kind of moving the shading to be more pink or purpley. Thankfully, this artist gave me a version with very little shading, so I'm able to add some of my own. In the original piece, you mostly added the highlights on the left, so I'm going to assume the light source is coming from the left, and will shade mine in a similar way. Now, I'm not going to fully render this piece and make it super snazzy or anything. I'm going to keep things pretty simple. I add most of the shadows with my pen tool and add some gradients with the airbrush. When I was a beginner artist, I thought blendy shadows equaled good shadows, and I would blend out all of my shading. However, if you overblend your colors or don't blend them in the right way, things can start to feel muddy and like the forms aren't really coming through. I do still use blending in my work, especially if I am digital painting, but I also allow myself to define edges and allow harsher shadows where they are needed. Not everything needs to be fully blended. Also, I did change the saturation of some of the colors so that they are more saturated and match the colors that I used for the shading. And so here's the before and after. The colors in the new one I feel like more closely fit the character and how she's drawn. So yeah. I hope this helps. For this picture, I wanted to talk about the importance of thinking about the silhouette of a pose. So if I go over the character with a solid color so that we only see the shape, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on. We can't really read the pose. However, if I select the hand and move it out and then make the silhouette, we can easily read the pose and it looks a bit more interesting. Considering what a pose looks like based on the silhouette can be very helpful in making easy to understand or more interesting poses. Also, your drawing is super cute and I hope this helps a bit. Your drawing style is very charming and I love all the small details and the pose has a good flow to it. When looking at the pictures you sent me, I am noticing that you draw your eyes on the smaller side, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like the placement of the eyes needs to be adjusted. They feel too far apart. I'm going to move the eyes in and just slightly increase their size to help with the distance. Because I did move the eyes in, I need to move the sides of the head in a bit, and I use my liquify tool for this. And so here's the before, and here's the after. I will also adjust the eyes for this picture. Once again, I'll move them in a bit and make them slightly larger. Something else I do is adjust the eyebrows. The eyebrows can be very important for expressing the proportions of the forehead. To help the forehead feel more in proportion, I'm going to lengthen the eyebrows. I also lower the eyelids to a place that feels a bit more natural. Lastly, the nose and mouth are feeling a bit low to me, so I raise them up just a tish. So here's the before, and here's the after. Overall, your style is super cute. I just recommend drawing the eyes a bit closer together, and I hope this helps. For this picture, something that was standing out to me is actually nothing. Because the character's hand is gesturing this way and the character is looking this direction, my eye keeps getting stuck in this empty space instead of looking at the character. So I'm going to adjust the size of the canvas to help with this. Secondly, when drawing characters, it's really important to double check that limbs are the same length. The arm on the left feels very much in proportion, and the elbow is at about the halfway point as it should be. However, the arm on the right has a much longer forearm, and the elbow isn't at the halfway point because of this. So I'm going to select the forearm and make it shorter. Next, the shoulders feel a bit off, and the left shoulder feels like it's not really fully connected with the torso, kind of like it's out of socket. To help with this, I'm going to push things down and extend the rib cage back so that the shoulder feels like it's more connected and isn't sticking too far out from the torso. And here's the before and after. Overall, very nice work. This artist expressed that they feel like their art feels kind of blank or like the characters don't have emotion. And for a little bit, I couldn't put my finger on as to why the expressions felt blank, but then it occurred to me that you don't draw eyebrows. Eyebrows are so important for conveying emotion and can add a lot of life to characters. So let's go to this picture. I'm going to start by adding a bit more expression to her eyes by making the lower part of her eyes curve more upwards. By pushing this curve, we can make the eyes feel more smiley. Oh, and I do slightly adjust the eyes. The left one feels longer than the right one, so I was adjusting that a little bit. When drawing smiley emotions, it can help to push the mouth up a little bit higher to help the smile feel more strong. Lastly, I'll add in some eyebrows. Since she is happy, these are going to be standard, kind of just curving eyebrows. So here's before, and here is after. I hope this helps you make more expressive characters in the future. The first thing that stood out to me is that this character has her legs crossed. However, her feet are over to the side. This makes it so her weight is not resting under her. If I were to try to stand like this, I would fall over. So I'm going to adjust her legs to make them be more under the center of her body. When drawing legs that are crossed, it's important to remember that both of the feet move from their default positions. It's not just one leg moving and going in front of the other one. The other leg also moves over so that the person can stay balanced. Overall, the proportions feel very nice though, and I hope this helps. For this next picture, I'm going to be discussing a topic that I've kind of avoided, but I see so many people draw this area in an odd way that I thought it may be good to talk about. I'm going to be talking about the female chest. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be going into detail or anything, just discussing the basic shape and how to define it, especially when the shape is interacting with clothes. If this topic makes you uncomfortable, you can skip ahead to this timestamp. So let's start by sketching out the upper torso to use as a base. The female chest is essentially just kind of fat that is on top of all the muscles. Now, how sometimes I see people draw the chest is they'll draw it like it's two hard circles. They will over-define the shapes, and the wrinkles of the clothing will be kind of awkwardly placed. The shape I often use for the chest is kind of a soft shape that bumps out a bit more towards the bottom half. Of course, the shape can vary depending on the clothing that the person is wearing. Like if a person is wearing a looser garment, the chest will be in a more relaxed state. However, if they're wearing something maybe tighter or more fitted, it'll push the chest kind of up. If a character is wearing something like a lightly looser fitting t-shirt, the fabric kind of drapes over the chest. You most often get vertical folds, and you may get a small fold along the top form of the chest. To help give a sense of form, you can add some shading to the underside of the chest. I will often make this form go in a bit in the middle. Now let's discuss a tighter fitting shirt. With tighter clothes, we are going to get more horizontal folds, and the clothing will more closely follow the shape of the chest. But I'm going to avoid over-defining the shape, like how I mentioned earlier. The t-shirt fabric is kind of being pulled from one side to the other. It's not gonna like dip down in the middle and crease, if that makes any sense. Because the shirt is following the form of the chest more, the shadow will also follow the form more closely. In this artist drawing, the lines for the chest feel overly defined. Now, depending on the garment, you can get a more defined shape of the chest if it is sewn in a way that defines the shape. For example, like a corset or something. However, the dress isn't drawn in a way that suggests it has this kind of form, so I'm going to adjust things to help the shape feel more natural. I'm mostly going to just get rid of some of the lines and indicate the form of some shading. So yeah, I know finding info and tutorials on this can be hard, especially if you are trying to avoid more graphic imagery, but hopefully I was able to discuss it in a family-friendly way and that it helped. This artist submitted multiple pictures, and when I looked at all of them, I noticed that you like to add texture to your art. And I am a fan of adding textures to pictures, but I often try to avoid using textures that are very repetitive, as they often don't feel as natural. If you look at the texture, it doesn't take long to see there is a repeating pattern. Like for this one, I can see this letter I kind of shape over and over again. An easy way to add texture that doesn't repeat is to use noise. Many programs have the ability to add noise, and it's a very easy way to add a soft touch of texture. However, if you want a different kind of texture, this is understandable. But when you're looking for textures, try to find ones that aren't too repetitive like this one. This one is very repetitive. This texture, on the other hand, does repeat, but it still feels varied enough where it's hard to tell. Also, when adding textures, I recommend changing the color of the texture to a color that suits your piece, and also playing around with the layer mode until it looks good to you. This can help the texture from feeling too overly powerful or washing out your picture. I really like this piece. The composition feels very good with this triangle kind of shape. I like the exaggerated curve of the fingers, and we also have the hair guiding our eyes back to the center of the piece. This artist did ask for a bit of advice on the anatomy, and I do feel like maybe I should be able to see the other shoulder just a little bit. Also, if I follow the forearm, it suggests that the elbow is placed down very low. I would recommend changing the angle so that the elbow would be more where it's supposed to be. Lastly, the eyes do feel a little bit wide set. You often want to aim to have about one eye width in between the eyes, but of course this can vary with style. But overall, very lovely work. Thank you so much to everyone for submitting art. I had so much fun looking through all the pieces. And I hope the info in this video was helpful to the people that submitted art and to those of you who are watching. Before we end, I want to thank my wonderful YouTube members and Patreon patrons for their support. It means so much to me. And thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next week in my next video. Bye!